And welcome in, everyone, to another Lennox on Baseball chat. We are delighted to welcome in author Steve Kettmann. We're going to get into several of his book titles over the years. And Steve, thanks so much for taking a couple of minutes with us here. So I put out there that I was reading Baseball Maverick, the book that you did, published in 2015 on Sandy Alderson. So a few Fridays ago, I put it out there. You were kind enough to respond when I put it out there in the social media world. It was 4:55 on a Friday afternoon. I went into the library to return a book. I went to the sports section. I know it well. And boom, I was just looking for something. And the lady at the front desk said, we close in 8 minutes. It was, like 5 minutes, 8 minutes. I said, I'm going to be out of here in 3. Went, found your book. Boom, loved it. Appreciate you taking a couple of minutes with us. And as we get into here, I've always been enamored with Sandy Alderson. We'll kind of go back and forth here. But the book that you did on Sandy, published in 2015, Baseball Maverick. Kind of give us an idea of your relationship and how the book kind of came about, if you would.
Well, here's a good way to think of it. A lot of people have followed the story of the Oakland A's sad season this year. And looks like they're probably going to end up in Las Vegas. People are following all those ridiculous machinations. But to go back a ways, in 1997, I believe it was, I was covering the Oakland A's for the San Francisco Chronicle. And, I started hearing some things through my sources that the A's were actually real interested in trying to go to Las Vegas at that time. And in fact, they had commissioned a feasibility study on going to Las Vegas. So I did my due diligence. I talked to a bunch of people in Vegas and I made sure that it was legit. And I went with the story, and my story was airtight. Now, this was an era where we didn't have Twitter, and the newspaper really mattered. And the San Francisco Chronicle is the largest circulation in Northern California. Everyone really cared what was in there. So I had this major scoop. It was a huge deal. And nothing I did in the article was wrong, but the headline was not great. And so Sandy Alderson was the general manager of the A's at the time. The former Marine officer in Vietnam, Harvard Law, former honor man for the Marine Corps at 8th and I. He was in charge of the honor guard, the silent drill team. When Lyndon Johnson died and his body lay at the Capitol Rotunda and thousands of people streamed in, you had the Marine guards in dress white standing ramrod straight. Well, Alderson not only was that guard, but he commanded that unit. So I had him covering him in Oakland, found him to be intelligent, fascinating, deep, a little intense at times, but mostly good to deal with. Well, that day when I broke the Las Vegas story, he didn't like the headline, and he screamed at me in the parking lot at Papago Park, where the A's had their spring training facility then. And, he basically gave me his best shot, and I stood there for about 20, 30 minutes taking it. And, we were kind of like barking dogs who kind of barked themselves out. And, I didn't really know what to make of it. I figured he pretty much hated me at that point. And then when he left the A's to take a job with Major League Baseball, working with Bud Selig, a lot of us thought he might even be commissioner one day. But at that juncture, I remember there was a press conference at the Oakland Coliseum. And after the press conference, he finished up on the podium or lectern or whatever, and then made a point of walking pretty much directly over to me to shake my hand and say, Kettmann, we had our differences, but I want you to know I always respected you. And so that was kind of the moment where it went from hostile adversary, back when the newspaper reporter really mattered, to something that was more part friendship. And then I'm happy to tell you, as an interesting sidelight, I wrote a book as a ghostwriter called Juiced. That was for Jose Canseco. And I knew it was going to be a big deal. And I had no ethical problem with giving Canseco help because I knew he was telling the truth. I mean, that's Mike Lupica later wrote in the New York Daily News that Jose Canseco only told the truth and juiced because his ghostwriter Steve Kettmann made him, which was a compliment I liked. But I think it's true. I think I really did kind of hold his feet to the fire. So I was focusing on truth, but at the same time, clearly I felt like everything that had happened with steroids had dragged on too long. Baseball let it go too far. And so I was hoping with the book to force Major League Baseball to basically not go ostrich in the sand on steroids. So I would meet with Alderson and give him a heads up on what was coming. That was my way of dealing with it. And then here he was working at MLB in one of the top jobs. At least I knew he would do with that knowledge whatever he wanted. And so again, that's the kind of thing journalists and authors do all the time. It's straightforward. Again, it's part of actually trying to build an audience for the book because you want people to have some idea what's coming. And through that process, and we were both living in New York at that time. And so I got to see him more. And then when I did my first book, One Day at Fenway, which we can talk about if you like, but that gave me the opportunity to do another book. And basically, I ended up going out to lunch with an amazing man named Morgan Entrekin, who is the publisher of Grove Atlantic, a real legend in publishing. And we went out to lunch to talk about different sports ideas. And as we were sitting there in, I forget where we were, downtown Manhattan somewhere, Alderson was interviewing with the Mets for that job of becoming general manager in the Wilpon era, a much different time. So it just seemed like it was kind of meant to be. I went to work, and that's how the project came together.
As the book goes on, I was amazed at the access that he gave you. I mean, you basically corresponded in a lot of different ways. Was that a surprising factor with you that he gave you such access and such honesty?
Yeah, in some ways. But my first book, One Day at Fenway, was an access book as well. I had incredible access to like Larry Lucchino of the Red Sox, John Henry of the Red Sox. Joe Torre spoke to me at length for that. And, I really started in books because I had gone to school at UC Berkeley way back. And I really, I never set out to be a sports writer, but I was a big Roger Angell fan. I would read him in the New Yorker, and I would read the old, bound volumes of the physical New Yorker. And I loved Roger. And so later on, after I was a beat writer covering baseball, I got to know Roger a little bit then, and we were friendly. And I wrote an appreciation, which I encourage you to look up in Salon. It's still there. All about Roger and why I thought he was so special. And that was one of these articles that kind of a lot of people seem to enjoy and share. And it led to an opportunity to spend a summer in New York working with Roger Angell at the New Yorker, conceiving and editing a collection of his. So I remember I invited Sandy Alderson to the party at the house of David Remnick, the editor of the New Yorker, who's a pretty amazing guy. He was actually a sports writer for the Washington Post when there was an opening in the Moscow bureau, and he took it, and then all of the major changes at the end of the Soviet Union took place and his career launched. But my point is, when you invite a guy to a party at David Remnick's house in New York with all these, famous writers around, I think maybe George Plimpton was there, I can't remember, but whatever. Sandy and his wonderful wife, Linda, who I have known for years as well, they kind of had fun. And Sandy and I had our fights. He knew my work and he trusted me. So what I would say about the book is I love the book. I highly recommend it to people. And I think it's especially useful as a It's not a commentary in any way on Moneyball, but I think people who've read Moneyball and enjoyed it can read this as kind of a different side of the coin. It covers the relationship between Sandy and young Billy Bean, who, I still consider Billy a friend to this day. He and I were emailing recently, and if you saw Moneyball, the movie, you might remember that Billy Bean has a daughter, Casey. Now, I remember Casey when she was, I don't know, 7 or 8 or 9. I have daughters that age now. I was kind of a single guy on the beat. I wasn't used to talking to people's daughters, but Casey was a great kid, and Billy was a really warm father. And I remember all that. And Billy just emailed me a couple of weeks ago that Casey was getting married. I was so happy for him. But in the book, I talk about, I've always been quite fascinated with mentor-protege relationships.
Okay.
I think it's great when you're fortunate enough to have the opportunity to learn a lot from someone. And I was on the phone with Buck Showalter last week, and he was talking about learning from, oh man, now I haven't drawn a blank on anyone, but from Billy Martin. And when Buck was young in spring training, he would kind of follow Billy around, and he talked about like the little duckling following along the duck. And as you may recall, that's the phrase that Pedro Gomez had used describing the way Billy Bean followed Sandy Alderson around. Now, some people who read the book had a kind of negative reaction to that, like it was supposed to be demeaning of Billy Bean, which I don't get at all. We were all, student at one point. We were all young and learning from people that we respected. And Billy and Sandy, again, to this day, have a great relationship. And it was just interesting how much that organization under the Haas family really did inspire a lot of fresh, original thinking. The first computers in baseball, which a young unknown company called Apple donated because they were hoping for a little pub. So yeah, I love that story of the mentor protege relationship there.
So you mentioned Billy Martin, Buck Showalter, Sandy Alderson, and Billy Bean. And when Sandy Alderson and the Haas family took over ownership of the A's organization, it was Billy Martin who was shown the door because he wasn't necessarily going to embrace all the new things that they wanted to do. He was as old school as they got.
Well, that's mostly right, but it's a little bit different than that. So the president of the A's was a guy named Roy Eisenhart, who was your classic Renaissance man. He was a gifted athlete who would play tennis with Billy Martin, and I believe hold his own, and was a professor at Bolt, UC Berkeley Law School. They don't call it Bolt anymore. And he married into the Haas family. He was an important mentor to Sandy Alderson in turn. And Roy, I'm happy to say, I don't even know how old Roy is now. He's in his 80s. He still teaches at UC Berkeley Law School. And he and I still talk. He called me yesterday, and I've got to call him back. We talk regularly, and I adore this man. But I remember interviewing him for that book for Baseball Maverick and expecting him to talk about Billy Martin, sort of the young tough from the other side of the tracks in Berkeley, and kind of a ruffian and hooligan, ragamuffin Casey Stengel called young Billy Martin, but actually Roy and Billy Martin had a kind of electric, what I would call intellectual connection, because Billy Martin was quite brilliant. His mind was alive with detailed, intimate knowledge of baseball and a lot of fresh insights. I never spoke to the man myself, but everybody, I know a lot of people. Some of my, when I joined the A's beat in the 90s, some of my regular dinner companions were Billy's old crew. I'm thinking of Steve Vucinich, the legendary longtime equipment manager for the A's. and also Mickey Morabito, who was a PR man in New York for the Yankees when Billy Martin was first hired there. And then Martin brought Mickey out to Oakland, and they worked together for years. But they all agreed that there was a real genius to Martin, and Roy Eisenhart loved that. So when the Haas family bought the A's, there was one season, they did do the whole Billy Ball thing, where they realized, hey, this guy is popular with fans, and they marketed the heck out of it. Those Oakland A's kind of, and I write about all this in the book, but they kind of invented community relations. And it was the son of Walter Haas, Mr. Haas, the sort of the top team owner. His son Wally, who had at this stage or a little earlier, long hair. He was managing a psychedelic funk Marin County band called the Sons of Champlain, which no less an authority than Bruce Jenkins, my former San Francisco Chronicle colleague, whose father was the great Gordon Jenkins, often described as Frank Sinatra's favorite musician and collaborator. Bruce tells me the Sons were awesome. And Wally came from that to do community relations for the Oakland A's, all really specifically in a bid to revive the Oakland community. That's why the Haas's bought the A's. They were San Francisco people. They were Giants fans, but they did it as basically a philanthropic endeavor to really try to bring back the community. And Billy Martin worked well for that for a while. The kid from West Berkeley, the local kid, Oakland Oaks. Billy Martin, of course, had played for Casey Stengel with the Oakland Oaks of the PCL, and really had a lot of ties to the community. But Billy Martin, as you know, from your own knowledge of baseball, had a pattern of being really great for a team for maybe a year or two.
Right.
And then kind of, as George Steinbrenner discovered, it works for a while until it doesn't. And Billy kind of wore people out, I think. And so,
I was thinking about that present day with the pitching injuries. That was his season in Oakland. A lot of those guys went down.
That's a good point. Yeah. And they went from, I know his second season, they did pretty well in terms of wins and losses. I can't give you the number, but by his third season in Oakland, it was not good. It was not good. So I think it was a case where pretty much everyone kind of knew something needed to happen. And then I go into some detail in the book. You've read it more recently than I have, but where there was a famous incident where Martin kind of went berserk and trashed his manager's office. I think, did he destroy a phone? I mean, again, you read it more recently than I did, but
he was a tornado.
Yeah. And a lot of people thought that, and I've heard different takes on this to this day, that Steinbrenner wanted to hire him again, which of course he did. And that this was kind of his way out in Oakland, was to sort of throw a fit. Like, again, my 7 and 9 year olds might. Yeah.
Steve Kettmann is joining us, author of several baseball books that we're talking about. Again, when I picked the book up at the library, it brought memories back for me because, and this is sort of, I guess maybe an admission. I knew the name, but I didn't know the history of Sandy Alderson completely. So I'm doing the World Baseball Classic with Orestes Estrada in Tokyo, Japan, the inaugural World Baseball Classic for XM Radio at the time. And Orestes and I, between games, went back to the hotel one night. We're in the elevator, and this turned out to be our best place to do interviews because I ran across Bobby Valentine. We ran across a couple other people, and all of a sudden the elevator doors close, and Orestes kind of elbows me, he points towards Sandy Alderson, and we talked for a few minutes, and he was terrific just in conversation. And then I rode the elevator again with him solo, and was almost nervous and thought he was almost in a trance the way he talked or the way he was. And he finally just kind of, he got the conversation going. All these years later, in reading the book and everything that you described about him, was right there in those very two brief conversations at the Tokyo Hotel outside the Tokyo Dome way back in 2005.
Yeah, I actually remember him talking about that. I mean, that trip, at
Yep.
least. But one thing about Sandy Alderson, yes, he was trained at Harvard Law, so he did work as a lawyer briefly before, and he started with the A's as a lawyer. So, and I was raised. My father was a local judge in San Jose, California. So yeah, I respect lawyers, but when you're a writer and a journalist, sometimes lawyers can wear you out a little bit with the way they use the language. But the thing about Sandy Alderson is he was always and continues to be very articulate and very clear in his choice of words. But what you learned was you had to really listen not only to what he was saying, but to what he didn't say. Because people communicate a little differently now, where everything is more headlines and kind of you just kind of assume that what they said. But he really made you stay on your toes as a reporter. And if you really stayed on your toes and paid attention to what he was saying and wasn't saying, including during difficult periods, like I started covering baseball 10 games before the end of the 1994 season. So I was around at, Gainey Ranch in Arizona in 95. Baseball was trying to, they'd canceled the World Series and now they're trying to get going again. And, when you listen to Sandy Alderson do a press conference talking about Donald Fear, whose name he always said that way, which was partly respect, but you had to really stay on your toes. And I feel like it made me a better reporter throughout, years of doing this, covering someone who was that bright and that careful with words. And that was part of my interest in him, that I felt like he was a worthy adversary.
Baseball Maverick, Steve, wraps with 2014. What kind of dialogue did you have with him in 2015 leading up to the World Series and even during the World Series?
Well, I can talk about it now because it's all public knowledge, but we were working on the book, and I recall, I think it was the day that, the Mets advanced, Sandy said he needed to talk to me, and he came into a press box or something, it must have been like some auxiliary room at the ballpark, and told me that he was dealing with cancer, and I could tell no one. But he felt it was important that I knew. So I was one of the first people that he had actually told about that. And I told no one. I didn't even tell my wife. I just was like, wanted to be very respectful of his desire to keep a very, very low profile on that. But that really kind of jumps out at me because here was, he famously had a run in Oakland, 88, 89, 90, the earthquake series of 89, won a World Series championship pretty young. And then, was kind of wanting to go back. Here he's going back to the World Series and he's dealing with cancer. It just seemed, I felt for him. And then, there was the whole period where, I enjoyed hearing from him about Steve Cohen as a new owner of the team, which I was very excited about at the time. That first year or so, I was very excited about it.
Steve Kettmann is joining us here on our latest Lennox on Baseball chat. I have a bone to pick with you. I want to go 25 more minutes with Sandy Alderson along the way, but kind of getting into a couple of your other books. You mentioned the book on Fenway Park, One Day at Fenway. Kind of give us a summary of that. And all these years later, I asked this to a couple of authors recently. Not the best compliment that you ever got on the book overall, but the best in person. Someone speaking to you about that book. What's the best compliment that you've ever gotten?
I can't tell you the best compliment I got on a book. I'm not sure if I can remember his name. I'm trying, but there is a new book out right now. Who, if you haven't had him on your podcast, you should. It's all about Vin Scully, the great Vin Scully, And when I started at the San Francisco Chronicle, I was a copy editor, writing headlines about Joe Montana and Steve Young and so forth. But then I was given the job of writing about TV radio, the airwaves column. And so I would kind of review the talkers. And I remember writing about Vin Scully at the time. And being a Giant fan from Northern California, I tended to tune out the Dodgers. But Vin and all of his greatness really made an impression on me. And, I have friends that knew Vin well, and, I hear nothing but good things about him. So there's a new book out, which I apologize for not remembering the title, but it's easy to find. And it's different essays, all in appreciation of Vin Scully and how special he was. And I heard actually indirectly and then also directly from the guy who did this, that he was inspired to do this book by the book I did for my friend Pedro Gomez. After Pedro, the ESPN baseball reporter, died of a heart attack about 3 years ago. And that book, was a total labor of love. Remember Who You Are. And there is a webpage for it, which is thegomezrules.com. thegomezrules.com. I definitely urge people to check it out. It was a thing where there was so many people in baseball felt so strongly about Pedro that they all wanted to participate. So I had great writers. I had 7 active baseball managers who are all included in there: Dusty Baker, Tony La Russa, AJ Hinch, Ron Washington, who wasn't a manager then but is now. And it's really something I'm very proud of having done. But to hear that book inspired somebody else to do something that, when I heard of the book, I in no way thought, oh, he's knocking off Remember Who You Are. That's my favorite compliment. I can say that without hesitation.
So my dad has a phrase, and Sandy Alderson had a tremendous relationship with his father. It's something to say of, my son's in Vietnam, and he's basically here because of his dad, and his dad takes him out on an experience that no one really ever experiences. But my dad's phrase is, "I've got a bone to pick with you." So Steve, I've got a bone to pick with you, because now, twofold, doubling up, because you mentioned the book on and the essays with Vin Scully. But earlier this morning, when you sent an email out, you've given me another assignment. My stack of books, and by the way, I have most of Roger Angel's titles, not on this bookshelf behind me, but on another bookshelf. That's on my to-do list later in the year. But you brought up Billy King. And you helped publish the book, Holy Toledo, I think, 2013 by Ken Korak. On Billy King, and I'm 100% in agreement on it, is deserving of being recognized with the Ford Frick Award, and being deserving of being in Cooperstown and recognized as one of the all-time great broadcasters. But tying that into Sandy Alderson, when the Haas family in the early 80s came on board as the owners of the A's, it was Billy King who they wanted from Baseball Maverick.
Yeah, there was a year where this is actually a great story. Larry Baer, who's the president of the San Francisco Giants, or that has been his title for years, being a key executive, he was a Berkeley student at the time that Charlie Finley owned the A's, and they had no radio station, so they put them on Cal X, the student station, and Larry Baer did some play-by-play, as I recall. So they had been nowhere. And one of the things that the new ownership wanted when they got the A's was they really wanted a good radio presence. And so there is some wonderful stories in that book, Holy Toledo, about the meetings. Oh no, I wrote about it in Baseball Maverick too, didn't I? I think I did.
Yes.
I wrote about it.
They brought him on board. Yep.
Yeah. Where they met with him, and Bill, of course, was a classic, another Renaissance man, to use that phrase. But we had for the book, which just briefly, my wife and I run a small writers retreat center in Santa Cruz, California, called the Wellstone Center in the Redwoods, wellstoneredwoods.org. And we do publish some books, and it's mostly to inspire people and to inspire writers. But we published Holy Toledo, so I edited it and published it. And the cover features original art from a guy named Mark Ulrichsen, a gifted New Yorker magazine cover artist. He's had more than 60 covers in the New Yorker.
It's
And
funny, when I saw the title this morning, when I Googled it and I saw it, and it's been a while since I saw it, I was thinking the New Yorker.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he has a very distinctive style, and he loved Bill. I grew up with Bill. Now, in fairness, Bill's third best sport was baseball. He was
I was going to
best
ask
on
that.
basketball. Yeah. And then he was good on football, but then he died. You know, he was getting a hip replacement operation, and he died in a weird way. And then he had not been in any of the halls of fame. So when we started doing books, I thought of this right away, suggested it to my friend Ken Korak, who is a great broadcaster. I feel so bad that he has to live through the sort of sadness of the last year in Oakland, but he did a great job on the book. And then we had a preface from, I keep saying great, but what else do you say about John Miller, the former ESPN broadcaster who does Giants games? He wrote a preface or forward to the book. And then John and Ken sent the book out to a lot of Frick voters. And I've only been to Cooperstown once, but it was when Bill King was, honored with the Frick Award. And I'm there at Cooperstown, which is a dream already. And all these people kept coming up to me and saying, "Thank you so much for doing that book. I don't think without that book, Bill would have been honored in this way." So that one means a lot to me.
Steve, absolute pleasure. We close with this, and you've mentioned a handful of them, and we talked about the mentor-mentor relationship. On your LinkedIn, I saw last night, your next book that you're working on is Baseball Managers. Can you kind of give us an idea of where that is in the process, and who you've got your eye on, and who maybe doesn't make the cut? Have you cut anyone from the potential book?
It's too painful to think of it as cutting anybody. But as of now, Earl Weaver is not really in the book because it's not trying to be comprehensive. The working with George Gibson, my editor at Grove Atlantic, he works with Morgan Etrican. I came up with a system where we really build each chapter around one individual manager so that we explore some aspect of managing. So, for example, there are some early chapters that are historical. John McGraw on intimidation, Connie Mack on losing, and then Bucky Harris on being forgotten. 100 years ago, Bucky Harris was the boy wonder manager of the Washington Senators when they went to the World Series. And one of the great Game 7s in World Series history, Harris, as player manager, managed well. First instance of an opener, first instance of a closer, and I believe he had a couple of hits as well, helped by a pebble in the base path. But I do the historical, and then of course, Terry Francona on communication, AJ Hinch on psychology. He was actually a psychology major at Stanford.
Okay.
Dusty Baker on pride. And so on. And then, so there's 18 chapters like that. And then there's 6 chapters focusing just on individual World Series games. So, for example, when Billy Martin caught that Jackie Robinson pop-up in the 1952 World Series, and the Yankees won for Casey Stengel, who had been Billy's mentor out in Oakland, that was a really fun chapter to write. So that gives you an idea of that one.
So part one of this last question is, where are you at in terms of a publishing date? Are you going to print at some point soon? And can I throw this out there and maybe we get not only Earl Weaver into the book, but maybe Terry Collins as well, tie that in with Sandy Alderson and his time with the Mets and getting to the World Series in 2015. How about managerial ejections?
Oh, yeah. I haven't written about that much, but I'm fascinated by that. And I always look when I go to Baseball Reference or whatever, and they have the column for that. I always look at that. And I've talked about it with guys. But I haven't done a whole chapter on it. My hope, like any writer, I'm hoping that this book will come out. It'll come out either next year or the following spring. The onus is on me. If I can get the work
Okay.
done over the next couple months, because I've done most of my reporting and research. Aaron Boone was just out. The Yankees were in Oakland. And so, San Francisco. So I was able to go up and see Aaron there. That was probably my last, important interview for the book. So I think it'll be out next September. Happy to, talk to you again then. And the book's going to be a thick book. It's going to be like 120,000 words and up, I would think. And again, that's a conversation for my editor and I to have. But my hope is if it lands well. And I think that really what the book is about is that story always matters in baseball. The human side always matters. And you tell me, but I've been exploring the idea that baseball managers are kind of the storytellers of the game. And I don't think I've really heard anyone put it quite like that. Have you? Because I don't think I have. I don't think it's a cliche.
It's interesting the way I have, because I think going back into whenever it started of managers being available every single day to the media, both pregame and postgame, and the way you covered for the Chronicle all those years as a beat reporter, of sometimes they just all of a sudden have not an agenda, but they just have something that they want to share. Francona comes to mind. Willie Randolph for me comes to mind. I was in a scrum a couple of times with Willie Randolph, just standing there with a microphone, just waiting, just getting the sound bites. And he looked at me one day like, what do you got? You have any questions? And I kind of came up with something just to say, I'm trying to figure out where I put you in this Mets lineup. Are you batting second or eighth? And he goes, I bat me ninth. And they are the storytellers, because again, it's not just talking about the games every day. They might have something to talk about, across the dugout, with a relationship or not. But, Francona in the last 25 years, that's the one name that really comes to mind.
Yeah. And I love my Francona chapter, which I'm not going to say more now. But I'll make sure to get you the book in galleys, the ARCs. And
it'll go right to the top of my list.
On more on the stories, I just have been thinking about the way, again, I covered Billy Beane and he was a friend of mine. And when Moneyball came out, fascinating book. It's been a major evolution in the game. Analytics were always around. So it's all about how the different pieces fit together. But I felt like one thing that happened was that as the manager was kind of demeaned and kind of silenced in a way, that the authority of the manager or the moral authority, then the ability of managers to be storytellers was, I think, also occluded to a degree. And so what I'm trying to do in the book is to kind of give managers their voice back. And so if I can do that, then there's probably room for a follow-up volume where I get to write about Earl and Terry, who I like Terry a lot and I had a good relationship with him because, he was managing the Mets when I was doing the Sandy book, and I talked to him then and have talked to him since. Bobby V, fascinating figure. And then some more historical figures that I haven't really written about, including DeRocher. I don't really write that much about DeRocher. You can't write about everybody. And the idea was try to go deeper on some people to have those stories be more universal.
You mentioned we'll close, Steve, with Francona wins it and breaks the curse with the Red Sox, and Terry Collins doesn't win the World Series in 15, but Terry Collins had his detractors going into that season and even afterwards. But to me, being a baseball guy, as I like to characterize myself, those two guys, and there are other managers too, but those two guys, I don't know, you could have picked another manager that Terry Francona could have broken the curse with the 04 Red Sox and Terry Collins getting the Mets to the World Series in that 2015 season.
Oh, I agree. Terry did a great job that year. And, one of my things that I get a chuckle out of is when I read people say things like, my cousin Joe could have managed the 27 Yankees to the World Series with that talent. Or, it's never easy. If you've been
No.
around inside the room and you've talked to players about what's going on, talk to managers, it's never easy. And the ability to keep things from snowballing and getting out of hand is it's what keeps managers on their toes. And they all talk to me about checking in with their guys once a week,
Yeah.
make sure they've talked to every guy. Every guy's different, you relate to them in different ways. And so what Terry Collins did with that team, I agree. I think he did a wonderful job. And my first book, One Day at Fenway, Grady Little, of course, was the manager of the Red Sox. And then my book came out in August '04. And so I'm always a little bit thankful to Terry Francona, because first time author, you have a book out there. It's kind of nice when the team wins the World Series. It helps. But I thought Tito was just the right guy. And I'll just close with one Tito story. I think we're probably close to out of time, but I was just talking about what makes him special, why he's such a great communicator. And I think it's pretty simple. He really cares about people and loves people and tries to connect with them on their own terms. And as an example of that, Tito, obviously the son of a big leaguer, talented college ball player, and he liked international competition. He went to Europe for, I don't know, the Pan Am Games or something like that. And then at one point when he was about 19, he was on a plane going to Havana, Cuba, and I guess it was 79. I'm not sure on the year. I feel like it was Jimmy Carter and not Reagan, but I'm not positive. Anyway, he goes to Cuba and he's talking to a scout who typically traveled with the team. What he doesn't understand is this scout was a boyhood friend with Fidel and played in the outfield at the University of Havana with Fidel. And then Fidel gave him, because they were friends, gave him an extra hour to flee the country before they arrested him, because he was part of the basically the Steinbrenners of Havana, this wealthy old family that built the Yankee Stadium of Havana. So this is a chapter I'm really excited about. This is for my next book. It's not in print now, but about Tito being there on the infield grass with this scout as he's crying tears and staring at Fidel. There's more to the story, but I'll leave it there to leave something for people later.
And again, that's a great way to sum up most of our conversation about Sandy Alderson. And even early on in his tenure with the A's, it was about those relationships. It was about making things better. And that, as you summed up, was Terry Francona as well during his years as a manager, and going back to, even when, growing up with his dad as a pro ball player.
Absolutely. And the Haas family, ownership of the A's, Roy.
There's a book right there with the Haas family. I know Oakland A's books have been written, but as you were writing about, present day of what it is in Silicon Valley, that's a family that had the businesses and knew how to treat and create business and take care of their people.
I agree 100%. Yeah. I've asked them about it. They didn't want me to do it, but I've asked them about it, the family.
Steve, great stuff. I appreciate it. Wish you all the best going forward. Enjoy the summer months, and definitely stay in touch, and looking forward to the next one with the managers. Thanks so much for taking the time with us.
Oh, thank you very much. And if people want to follow me on Twitter, it's just my name, Steve Kettmann, Kettmann. Definitely send your questions to me there. I'd be happy to answer them.
We got it available right now in our lower third. Steve Kettmann, thank you.
Thank you.
Steve Kettmann, author. Again, knew the name, library, handful of Fridays ago, looking for a book with the library closing within minutes. Found Steve's book on Sandy Alderson, who I've always admired and have been enamored with. I'll give you one final Sandy Alderson story. But Steve was terrific joining us here on our latest Lennox on Baseball chat, available on our YouTube channel. Feel free to pass along with your friends as well. The best advertising is word of mouth advertising as we continue to build this. But we've had some great guests as we've continued to do this. Started it during COVID, ended it stupidly, and back with a lot of great interviews that are up on our Lennox on Baseball YouTube channel. So I'm interviewing a college baseball coach a few years ago, and I can share the story now, but he never wanted his name and school attached to it. Just wrapping up on Sandy Alderson. The team went out, the school went out to Arizona. Sandy had ties with the university and met them at the airport. They had a long day of travel, got out to Arizona. They were going to play some games out in Arizona. Sandy met them at the airport. Might have been in the middle of the morning, and introduced himself to every single member of the team, coaching staff and team. The next day, they're at the ballpark for the first time, a little weary, and Sandy Alderson goes up to the coach and says, "Do me a favor, line them all up. I want to say hello." There was not a name that he missed. And I've always loved that story because I'm a person who, if I'm introduced to somebody, I'm one of those that the name will go in and out, and I'll lose it in seconds. Sandy Alderson knew from the night before, earlier in the morning before, to meeting them, he shook their hand as a former Marine and said hello and greeted them with their name with every single player. Again, our thanks to Steve Kettmann for joining us. The book on the managers is going to be terrific. His titles are terrific as well. And Baseball Maverick, how Sandy Alderson revolutionized baseball and revived the New York Mets organization, published in 2015, but a terrific book and a great read, as all of Steve's are as well. Our latest recap, day number 75 of the Major League Baseball season, available on X, also available on our YouTube channel as well. We'll recap every single day of the Major League Baseball season with our Lennox on Baseball live stream podcast. Again, thank you to author Steve Kettmann. And again, feel free to follow us and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where we've got some great former interviews, past interviews, I should say, and we've got more for the future as well. Enjoy your day, everybody.